Mike Verret, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
I cannot tell you, Steve, how excited I am to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm proud to have you. So, Mike, I like your message. Here, the folks that are listening, we want to get the story hook in now. And so, what I love about what you do is you're addressing the hardest challenge that every business owner faces. And that's how to clearly get the message that's in their head out and make it understandable for the people that they're wanting to help. Why in the world did this really attract you, and why did you start to embrace this?
That's a good question. I think with a lot of people who own their own business and start their own business, it was a question of trial and error. But the genesis of it came from my time at Hasbro Toys and Games, where my role sort of surreptitiously became the face of Hasbro Gaming. So my job was to produce and present our story to our global sales meetings, to our internal stakeholders, to buyers around the world, and ultimately to consumers around the world as well. My job was to communicate to them the benefits and the experience of what we provide through Hasbro Games. And playing games is obviously a very visceral experience, and it's supposed to bring out elements of competition or humor or just togetherness, right? Interaction. What we latched onto was the idea that we could make these people who are general managers of organizations, who are VP level, who are C-suite level, we could bring them up and have them play our game and react like a child, and the entire audience would see the reaction. And immediately they'd understand what we're all about. We would show them what it looked like. So when I left Hasbro in 2018, what I took away and what my call it strength is understanding an audience. And that does not have to be an audience in front of me, but understanding how an audience thinks and how to land a message with them became the hallmark of what I was doing in my business career. So that's what I took as the impetus for Verret Associates. And I started out really focusing on presentation and how to write and present the way you think to communicate your idea. And what I've evolved into is more about showing businesses how to talk about themselves, and more specifically, showing them how to talk about themselves in a way that gets their customer or their audience to say, tell me more. So you're familiar with the idea of the elevator pitch, and
Mhm.
everybody has heard the elevator pitch. You need to be able to say what you do in 10 seconds, and great. My theory on that is a little different. It's not about that 10 seconds. It's about how long that person wants to stay on the elevator and how many floors they would go up with you listening to it. So, in order to do that, there's almost a cadence to the information where you create intrigue and you let them know what you do, but it leads to the next question and it leads to here's how it works. And what I found was a lot of organizations and a lot of businesses have trouble crossing that bridge. They spend a lot of time looking at their business, and it's a business that, let's say they started it with an idea and that was 100% of their idea. But the second they start the business, that idea gets eroded by things like needing a website or an email address, or how am I going to market myself, or I need to sell, or I need to build more product. So it's constantly being eroded and cut into. What I do is make sure that they get back to that. They get back to what they are best at and the motivation for why they wanted to share this with people, and show them that it's not this big amorphous blob if you really hone down to the story you want to tell, because then everything from that story becomes just an expression of it. It becomes a chapter in the story. So I am able to help businesses grow through telling their story more effectively by simply understanding how to communicate with their consumer on what differentiates them.
Well, I think it's the biggest challenge that businesses face, nonprofits, parents, coaches, whatever, the folks that lead people. I think it's the biggest challenge they face is to clearly communicate the vision that's in your head and where you're going. But I think part of the thing that we hear folks that talk about stories like help you tell your story. But the problem is we need to figure out a way to weave in where the folks that we're wanting to serve see themselves in this story. What's the trick?
Well, I'll give you a wonderful example because it's one of the best examples that I saw from my time at Hasbro on how we would influence an audience and get them to adopt an idea as their own or relate to it in very personal terms. So we were charged with selling more of the game Monopoly. Now, if you know the game, you know that Monopoly is bought once for $15 and it sits in a game cabinet for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we were trying to figure out how to drive incremental sales. And we worked with our global insights team and they gave us a ton of insights, but we found one that was basically from an article, a headline from an article online. Poll: 50% of people cheat when they play Monopoly. So our first slide to the organization, there were 45 people in the room, was those words. That was it. And what happened was brilliant. 45 people started talking about experiences where they cheated or somebody else cheated. And it became very personal to them very quickly, meaning that idea was adopted and imprinted into their minds because they related to it. The very next slide introduced Cheaters Edition Monopoly, which came out, a year or so ago. But the idea was very simple. We were encouraging people to get away with the behavior that 50% were already doing and 50% weren't. And we even introduced if you get caught. So there were, these cards or whatever to try and get away with during the game. And if another player caught you, we added a handcuff to the go to jail space. So you would literally get cuffed to the board. But the whole thing was generated by the idea that we got the people in the room, our audience for this discussion, to latch onto that one insight and make it their own. And therein lies the rub. If you can understand the fact, I was telling you, everything I know is from the movies. If you can understand the fact that an idea in the movie Inception was described as being more contagious than any virus and more addictive than any drug, because once people adopt it as their own, they can't extricate it. They cannot get rid of it. So what we would do is focus on that relatability, making them understand what the result was or make them think about what the solution is before we would even introduce it. And that became sort of the guidepost for what I do now, showing businesses that whether it's a new business pitch or whether it's just a marketing presentation, it doesn't matter, showing them how to tell their story in a way that's going to get their audience to understand it by page 1 or 2, so that the audience is bought into the rest of the story.
So if I'm a regular business, this seems like a big hurdle for me. I'm like you said, I'm running a business, I'm doing HR, I'm trying to take care of the fires that put out fires, and I need to be creative and think like a movie and somehow get an idea implanted in the head of the folks that I'm wanting to help.
Yes.
That's a big hurdle. That's a big challenge. What is it that I need to do? Is it like if I can get them to envision themselves in the future utilizing my service or my product, is that the secret?
Well, that is a great question, and I'm going to answer it sort of with a visual, if you will, and why the logo of my company is a butterfly. Business owners, imagine caterpillars being born. Business owners, when they start their business, it's like a caterpillar being born. They have to be programmed to do certain things so they can become a butterfly. So they're going to eat the right leaves. They're going to eat leaves. They're going to climb a tree. They're going to build a cocoon, and eventually they become a butterfly. There's a lot of steps in there, and they just do them. Now, that's exactly what we do when we're running our own business. There's HR, there's accounting, there's marketing, there's sales, there's product development, there's operations. All of that becomes just the things that we do. So when do we have the perspective to look at that one thing that's going to drive us? Now, if a caterpillar was born 1 out of 100, let's say, with the perspective of a butterfly, and could see where the best leaves were, where the safest tree was, where the most sheltered place to build their cocoon was, they would effectively become a butterfly faster, correct? Because they know ahead of time. What I do is show businesses from an outside perspective, because it's a forest for the trees thing. We're dealing with all this stuff. I show them how to pull out that one thing, that story that they can anchor to. And what that does for them is starts to give everything else an element of that story. So they're only talking about one thing. Everything is always paying off to it. And the magic of it isn't magic at all. It's the fact that I have the 30,000-foot view of what you're up against, and you're down in the grass trying to eat the leaves, trying to climb the tree, So my job is to really pull out what's differentiating, how to make that your story, and effectively make your life easier and let you focus on driving your business the right way, and not looking at a list of to-dos every day. I have to market, I have to do this, I have to do that. If we can get out of the grass level and a little higher, we start to understand that all of these things are distracting us from what we're best at and what we can really deliver.
This is so important because every day you need to realize that your company, your messaging is up against some highly weaponized, attention grabbing, focus demanding entities. Instagram, Facebook, um, little kids, spouses, bosses, all sorts of things are demanding attention from the folks that you want to help. And then they're also grabbing their focus and their attention and keeping it for long periods of time. And that's what you're up against. No matter if you're a plumbing company, you're a restaurant, you're all competing against these same entities that are highly weaponized and very well trained. And this is
This is
why
true.
this is so important. If you can get this really clarified, your messaging really clarified, you now have an opportunity to compete in this world.
And you're talking about areas that are so cluttered and have created consumer behaviors like death scrolling, where you're just scrolling through content and you don't even know what you're looking for anymore. You're just going through it. Like those areas of opportunity that we see as marketing areas of opportunity, it takes either an unbelievable amount of resources or a razor sharp story to break through it. You know, if you think about the comparison of Instagram versus LinkedIn, okay, LinkedIn is beautiful because everybody goes there for one purpose. But how many purposes do people go to Instagram for?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's networking on LinkedIn. On Instagram, it is everything. So if you don't have a story that's going to connect with your audience on their terms in a way that they're going to understand, and you can't tell that story consistently, they're going to go to another channel. And that's what you're up against. It's hard.
The reason that story is so important is because our brains were designed a long time ago. I always say, even though our world changes, our brains remain the same. And our brains crave, they desire information that honors the rules of story. And this is why marketing is broken. This is why messaging is broken, is because everyone's coming from an industrialized perspective where messaging is designed for a consumer. And imagine this consumer is basically that mannequin at Dillard's that you can't tell if it's a man or a woman, but it doesn't have a face. And so when people sit down and design their messaging for their company or for a customer, that's who they envision. This Dillard's mannequin that happens to have a credit card in the pocket of whatever clothes it has hanging on it. And that's what most marketing is done. That's industrialized messaging is aimed at the Dillard's mannequin. And the rules of story actually turn it around and connect with humans. Humans are
It's an
considered,
amazing thing when that happens, isn't it?
yes. So walk us through some examples, Mike, of how you've worked with someone and changed this mannequin messaging over to human messaging.
Sure. Actually, the one of the formative experiences that I had in terms of understanding how consumers think and consume information was the character Elmo. Everybody knows the character Elmo, and Hasbro would make the feature Elmo every year, whether it was Tickle Me Elmo, Dance with Me Elmo. Let's say this one's Dance with Me Elmo.
Mhm.
And we spent an inordinate amount of time saying mom is the decision maker and the child is the nag factor and all of these assumptions and how the things work, okay? Which was leading us to how we approached search marketing even, all right? We were under the premise that we're gonna market Tickle Me Elmo until we went through this exercise. A mom uses Sesame Street as a device to get stuff done. It is a babysitter for an hour for all intents and purposes, and it has been for 45 years or 50 years.
Yeah.
The mom is not privy to the content there. She's hearing about it secondhand or knows fundamentally what Sesame Street is, but she's not seeing any of it. She's somewhere else. This is not co-viewing, right?
Mhm.
So imagine she's in the kitchen and little Jimmy comes in and pulls and says, "Mom, I want Elmo. I want Elmo." He's 3 years old. He's not saying, "I want Dance with Me Elmo." He's
Right.
saying, "I want Elmo." So mom now has a decision to make. Her child is coming with information. This will be something that makes the child happy and moreover distracts the child further. I want to get it. What do I search? They're not searching Dance with Me Elmo. They're searching new Elmo because that's how the consumer is receiving the information from a 3-year-old.
Mm.
I want Elmo. They must have seen something new. I'm going to search the term new Elmo,
Mhm.
not Tickle Me Elmo, not Dance with Me Elmo. We were missing the connection because we were thinking about how we talk about it and
Yeah.
not how they talk about it. What I have done recently with companies, and this was the most recent, is working on just their capabilities presentation, okay? And making them understand a simple thing that, let's use a resume as an example. The average employer will look at a resume 7 to 9 seconds, maybe 10 seconds.
Mhm.
Yet we spend all of our time writing our accomplishments. They don't have time to even look at. Where we should be focused is that one sentence at the top that is going to stop them from flipping and read below.
Right.
So with the capabilities presentation and with 2 clients that I'm currently working with, their capabilities are all about who we are and what we've done. What we focused on was showing them how to reflect the ask, the objective, why we're in the room to present our capabilities, reflect that back to them and explain to them what the real world problem is. You tell us you want to increase your presence on social media through paid and organic search. What we're telling you is you can't just increase your presence, you need to build your social home. We are home builders. That's what we do. Here's your challenge, here's the solution. Then I share with you what the work is to validate it.
Mhm.
It is not the first thing to lead with. What happened there was 5 people presented capabilities, 5 companies. Theirs was the only one that addressed the issue that was at hand. They related it to the consumer, to the client by explaining in very simple terms, this scrolling is something we all experience. And if you don't build your social home right, that's what's going to keep happening. You need to stop the scroll. And we had them right away.
Stop
Point
the
being, stop the scroll. So we gave them something to anchor the customer's mind to,
Yeah.
and then told them our validation and our story.
So think about that. Your resume is going in. Basically, your resume is like an Instagram post. But if you think about how you look at Instagram, that scroll, sometimes you're pushing it where it's like rolling and
Mhm.
you're not even stopping at each post. You're just rolling. And all of a sudden you just put your finger on something that really grabs your attention that you want to spend a little more time on.
Your thumb stops going like this for a minute and just goes,
Yeah.
what? Yeah.
So in essence, your resume, your business, your message is in the same way. It's just like that, not the blackjack table, but the craps table. No, it's the where's the marble that's bouncing on the
Roulette.
roulette?
Yeah.
Basically, your message is like the roulette. It's just bouncing around until finally someone's attention, it drops on someone's attention and a winner is declared. And so utilizing the advantages of how the brain is perceiving and deciding on how it's going to delegate carve off a little bit of its attention budget for the day. The
Yep.
rules of the story is how you earn that.
Yeah. And I mean, I would just taking your casino gambling metaphor a little further. Think of it this way. Roulette is you want to be prepared if it lands on your number, but that is chance,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're leaving it to chance. Poker is a game of skill. Poker is a game where you are not leaving it to chance. You are actually playing to your strengths in your hand. You're playing to what you have and understanding what the other player has based on the information you have.
I
That
love
is a lot more effective than roulette, where you have 36 numbers and each one you have to be ready with an answer. Versus if it's me versus you, heads up in poker, I know what you have, you know what I have. It's a much more engaging conversation. I think it's about education versus engagement, right? With your story, you can educate all you want, but if they're not engaged with it, they're not going to remember it.
Right. And the way that they become engaged is that there's some stakes in it for them, that they see themselves in that story.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of understanding how your end user or your customer is thinking and processing information from you. You're you're going to increase your close rate or your yes rate simply by bringing them into the process, by making them feel connected to what you're talking about right away. And it's a simple, like you said, it's conversation. That's how we communicate. We don't communicate in presentations. We communicate in conversation. So I
Mm.
tell everybody the difference between a presentation and a conversation is connection. And if you connect on their wavelength, they're never going to not pay attention to you because
Mm.
now you've given them that idea that they've adopted and made their own.
You know, you were talking in the beginning where you implant a thought into someone's head
Hmm.
and they adopt it over time and it becomes their own. They can't, I've, who's that magician? He's called Darren Brown. That's who it is. And he does a version of that where he can get them at the end of the exercise to pick all the things that he told you he was going to get them to pick.
Yep.
And it's by setting up a situation where those people become involved and that thought becomes implanted in their minds.
Exactly. And it's an amazing sleight of hand trick, right? And one of the things that makes it much harder for brands now is what Amazon introduced back in whenever it was, the late 90s, early 2000s, but the ability for consumers to talk to each other about brands,
Mm-hmm.
rating systems, review systems. That effectively took the power away from the brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the consumer is now calling the shots. And social media has just made it all the more important that, the consumer is calling the shots on content too. And if you're not resonating with them, it becomes a challenge. So think of this example. I love the insurance business because everybody back in the 90s had, like a rock was Prudential and
Yeah.
Liberty Mutual was Windsor Knott and Press Banker, Starch Bank, Banker College.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the good hands people, but everybody had an archetype, like a brand archetype. They were the sage, they were the hero, they were the creator.
Mm-hmm.
Along comes Geico, the jester, uses humor, right?
Right.
And we know that so easy, a caveman can do it. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? But they hit on something with that. I want you to think now of every insurance company that sells auto, home, whatever. Name one that's not humor driven now.
Yeah.
You can't, because everybody has pivoted to what the consumer responds to. They saw what Geico was doing and they created flow. or they created even Allstate now is they're moving in that direction by doing, hey, it's the same 40% guy. Hey, it's the same 40% guy. And then you look at Liberty Mutual. I mean, the stalwart of class and decorum and conservativeness is Limu, Emu, and Doug. And they actually use the term libbity bibbity in one of their ads. So that to me speaks volumes to understanding how your consumer processes your message. And it's not about what you think they're processing. It's about what they're going to take away and how to make sure that in that bag of what they take away are all the things you want them to have.
So the thought that comes to my mind now, some people might say, well, where does this border on manipulation, right? You're manipulating me into desiring your product, and in some cases it might be true, but how do you answer that?
Well, look, you're walking a fine line, right? And I think for a better term, the bullshit meter of consumers has never been more sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's think about the life of a consumer. You get text messages, you get everything on social media, you get phone calls, you get emails, you see billboards, you watch TV, you're getting everything from everywhere. Okay. And it was not like this 30 years ago, 20 years ago. It was very straightforward. You want what we have. I'm a TV ad salesman. I'm a radio ad salesman. I sell billboards. You want what we have. The consumers are calling the shots now, right? Which means the businesses are calling the shots too on what they need to have. The salespeople who are coming in can't say, you want what we have anymore. Because, well, do my consumers want what you have? Does my end user, the people who are purchasing it, they're asking the questions because they're not there. They're not reading the newspaper and stuff. They're where they want to be. They're skipping commercials on DVR. They're time bending. They're consuming an hour of content in 20 minutes. They're able to do this now. So they call all the shots on what they want to take in and let out. Manipulation almost becomes like it's like trying to trick someone who's too good at telling when someone's trying to trick them. It becomes harder and harder and harder. So companies have really moved. It's less about manipulation and more about alignment, more about empathy and synergy with how that person's thinking. But at the end of the day, what they are forced to do, whether they're trying to be manipulative or not, is be really straightforward with their message in a way that the consumer can see through the crap. And if they can't do that, they are going to come across as manipulative or taking advantage of a situation or a point in time. So look at COVID, what it did for advertising, right? Every company in the world slammed on the brakes, and every company said, we're here for you. We know what you're going through, right? Verizon is saying that. Yeah. Kohl's was saying that. Everybody was saying that. Well, do they know what we're going through?
No.
I mean, they weren't able to pivot their message. All they were able to say was, oh, we're here for you.
Well, I think of that Mr. Mom movie where the tuna company was like, that was the message for the tuna company. And it felt like everybody was just stealing that line from the tuna company in Mr. Mom.
Yeah, it's true. And it's like eventually people are going to get desensitized to it. Like this company that charges me $350 a month for my cell phone bill tells me that they know what I'm going through in a global pandemic. Seems kind of disingenuous to me.
It
seems like we have to let people know we're on top of this versus actually talking about what matters. Your service is going to be more important than ever. Here are the things we're doing to make your life easier. Mm-hmm. I don't want someone to come and say, oh, we know what you're going through. Do you want to try Verizon? That's not a message that makes any sense to me. But when Verizon drills down to, here's what we're delivering in 2021 so that we can make sure 2020 issues don't happen again, now that means something to me. Mm-hmm. So understanding what the consumer is listening for and understanding that they are more in tune to manipulation than ever. It's really about having a conversation with them that's honest and right up front. Here's what you're going through, and here's what we can do to help it.
I think that messaging that really nails the rules of story communicates more, it communicates clearly. Look, I understand you and you're safe here and you innately feel it. And so we have a connection. But if it's lazy messaging, if it comes from a place where you know what, just like your example, we know what you're going through and you're going, really, you know what I'm going through? So that messaging is going to land short and
Hmm.
feel wrong.
Hmm.
And and you're right. Your brain, when it's evaluating information from the perspective of the rules of story, it can clearly define someone and pick out someone that really understands me and relates with me.
Hmm. And relatability is ultimately, I'll use this like last example of forming connection that leads to conversation. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've had somebody say, "Where are you from?" or "Where did you go to school?" And you tell them, and and the next thing that happens is, "Do you know this person? Do you know this person? Do you know this person?" That is a way of us trying to find a connection to start a conversation.
Mhm.
It's just a simple device. That's what consumers need, is a platform to start a conversation. They don't want a bunch of functional benefits and what it means to you. They want to say, all right, my roof is leaking, right? If
Mhm.
I'm driving to the hardware store, I go by a billboard. I don't want to see a billboard that says, "We're Verret Roofing Company. We'll make sure that your roof never leaks again." What you want to see is, "Roof leaking? Call us now." Right? It is need state. It is, this is what I need to hear at this time. Companies don't spend enough time thinking about, they spend what they think they need to hear, but they don't spend any time processing that for how the person on the other end is going to receive it and interact with it. In effect, they're throwing out a roulette wheel of connections and hoping it lands on one,
Mhm.
versus engineering that connection and building it and playing strategically like you would in poker. So I think that's probably at its essence, Steve, is the biggest challenge for companies. Is there are way too many consumers that choose how they want to process information, and they are in control. They are not open to, "You want what we've got" anymore. You need to say, "Hey, what are you looking for? You know, what are you into?" You need to start a conversation with them. "What's your sign?" You need to build that connection, and then you can have a very normal conversation with them. So when it comes to social media, when it comes to getting your word out, and that, I can't remember the term you used, but think of like 7-layer marketing cake or whatever. Those become tactical executions that people are calling strategies. And the strategy is the connection point. That's it. I don't care how you propagate the connection, but the strategy is the connection point. Everything else beyond that is just, yeah, we'll put it on Instagram, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. And you have to customize it to the tactic, but you don't have a social media strategy. You don't have a content strategy. You have tactics that tell one story, and
Mhm.
it needs to lead to a connection and conversation. And that's it, bare minimum. And understanding how the person on the receiving end of that actually receives the information, that is the rub. That is what everybody needs to know, because then everybody's got a great story. But if the first page isn't grabbing them, they're in trouble. So that's
Oh,
where that's really what I've focused on, is helping companies understand the importance of that connection and how that'll help them grow their business. All comes down to how they talk about themselves to their consumers. And it has to be in a way that's going to say, "Tell me more." That's it.
so what's one question nobody ever asks that you wished they would so that you could answer it?
I wish that people would start by saying, "How the hell do I talk to this person?" And actually think about it as a communication between two human beings first. Okay. As opposed to leading with, I want them to say, how do I connect with that person? That should be the first question. It shouldn't be, how do I build my website? How do I create my SEO? How do I market to these people? What are my 7 levers that I can pull? None of that means anything until you understand, how do I talk to that person? As a human being, every single one of us as humans has had conversations with other humans. What's unbelievable is when it hits business, it becomes this, me versus them. And every time in a presentation, you can see it. Like, people get up there and they get stage fright, let alone what their message is. But just the idea of, you're standing in front of a group of people who are adults, and you've had conversations with an adult. What's the problem? It's that connection point. The second you're able to connect with your audience, everything else falls into place. You know what tactics you're supposed to be using. Maybe you don't need 7 layers. Maybe you need 3, but at least you know how to talk to them. So the question I would love clients to ask, or prospective clients to say, is, how the hell do I talk to these people? And we think about it from a very human, conversational perspective first. And that starts to answer a lot of the questions. I mean, really, it's that top sentence of your resume. If that stops someone in their tracks, you are far more apt to get the job. Think of it that way.
Totally.
So that's what I do.
So don't write that line to the Dillard's mannequin. Write it to that person standing there in the Wranglers.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say, everybody else is saying, I'm looking for this role and here's what I accomplished. If you know that, how do you do something different? I've been around the world looking for this opportunity because nobody can do A, B, and C better than me. Read on to find out more. Like, it's written for one purpose. It's a sentence, but it's written for one purpose. What I just said is so nuts that I have to see what the rest of the stuff is that this guy did.
Right. Who does this guy think he is?
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be bold and audacious. It can just build intrigue. It's find out more about me. And that's what businesses need to do. How do you say, here's what I am for you, in terms that you understand? Come and find out more about it. Put the idea in their head and let them adopt it.
Mike Verret. So how can people connect with you and get you to help them more with their messaging?
I would love them to simply check me out on LinkedIn. You can find me, Mike Verret, or visit my website, verretandassociates.com. You can book. I really just push for 30-minute phone calls that are free to clarify what your message is. And I encourage people to visit my site and just book time right there. And I love having conversations and just learning about people's businesses. And it gives me an opportunity to practice what I preach. But I learn every time I talk to them. And I feel like even in that 30-minute call, I'm able to shift their thinking and give them sort of a disruptive thing to consider. So it's worth the while. It's risk-free. And I promise not to be boring.
Mike Verret, how do you spell your last name?
That is V as in Victor, E-R-R-E-T, Verret.
Verret Associates. Mike Verret, find him on LinkedIn. He'll help you get your Hasbro, sell your Elmos.
That's right. Sell more Elmos. Why not?
Mike, thanks for being on the ROI Online Podcast.
Steve, thank you. And I hope I can return the favor down the road.
I'd love that.
All right.
All right. And that's a wrap.